Hello and welcome. I'm conductor Raffaele Ponti, and this is Behind the Notes. Today, my guest is the amazing clarinetist, Franklin Cohen. Frank, welcome.
Hi, great to be here, Raffaele.
Great to see you. Thank you for doing this. Listen, I would like to start right from the very beginning because we've got a lot to talk about with this amazing career of yours. So, was it that you came from a musical family that got you started, or was there one single event or person that inspired you to become a musician, and why the clarinet?
Well, that's a great question. It opens up a lot of doors.
Right.
My family, there were no professional musicians. My mother taught piano in the neighborhood in New York suburb. But she was actually probably more in love with music than any person I have met since meeting my mom, if that makes sense. She was always playing in the house. I remember spending a lot of the winter, this was north of New York City, lying under the piano, listening to her play because there was a heating register underneath the piano. So wow. I the coziness of the, are you seeing my video? Am I moving now, or I look frozen on the screen to me?
It's not moving yet.
I wonder why.
But we hear you perfectly, though.
Okay, maybe this will be better. But anyway, I fell in love with music listening to my mom practicing. And she said, "Would you like to study piano?" And I said, "Sure, why not? I seem to like music." So I took, I think, 2 years of piano lessons with my mom. And then, you know how it is with a parent. It's a little too close for comfort. So I said, "Mom, I don't know if this is working out." She said, "Well, Frank, you love music so much. Let me take you to a music store and we'll look at all the other instruments." And actually, that afternoon, I went to the music store and I came home with a clarinet because the other 4 instruments that the salesman put on the counter didn't make a sound for me. So that's how I chose the clarinet. It sort of chose me, actually. I'd love to give.
So the accordion didn't appeal to you. That's what you're saying, right?
Well, actually, it's funny that you mentioned that because at that time, the accordion was one of the most popular instruments, and every town had an accordion studio. And I had 2 or 3 friends that were studying accordion, but no, I don't know. It didn't. I like the music that my mom played, so that had great appeal.
Right. That's great. Did you actually, when you selected the clarinet, had you actually heard one at that point?
I don't believe I heard one and associated it with the clarinet. So I just, took it home, and I seem to have a talent for it. I was not a very, I was not a very good student in school, not because I'm not intelligent, but I didn't know it then, but I had severe attention problems. I had ADA before they diagnosed it. And I loved playing because it was moving. I wasn't sitting studying. My fingers were moving, my brain was moving, and my body was moving. I was blowing, and that was fun. And so it had an appeal on that kinetic level also.
Wonderful.
I just very good at sitting still. I'm still trying to get this video working for me. Is there any way or not?
I don't know on my end here. The tech staff might be able to, but I think let's just forge forward here because again, okay. I can hear you. It's a great shot of you anyways.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
Did you begin studying privately, or was it in a school situation, band or orchestra that you began training?
It was in a school situation with someone who, the leader didn't know a thing about the clarinet. So I did a lot of things completely backwards. But I got a sound, I got the idea. And then eventually my mom found me, a decent teacher.
That's terrific. So, I know you and we know you as being the illustrious principal clarinet of the Cleveland Orchestra, but that's not where it started for you. It started, I think, when you were around 22 years old. You won a major international competition in Europe, which really catapulted you right out of the gate to this big solo career. Can you talk a little bit about that competition and what happened from that competition? There you go.
There I am. Well, I never did music to get ahead or to compete. When I was in my first years of music school, Juilliard, I had some violinist friends that were winning prizes and some pianist friends that were winning prizes. And I thought, gee, that might be really fun, to enter something and travel to Europe. So I saw the list of competitions. They were all happening in Europe, as it turns out. Let me try this again. Yeah, and I saw the listing for the Geneva competition. This was in 1967. And I was sort of naive, okay, I'm going to practice the parts that I need to know and the concertos that I need, and I'll go to Geneva. Well, I went to Geneva and I went on stage to do my first round. And within 10 minutes, I was finished. And then I find the results, which is, well, you weren't passed by. So I didn't make it further in that competition. Came home a bit disappointed. And then I noticed the next year there was the biggest competition for solo wins in the world, which was the Munich competition called the ARD. And I thought, maybe if I take it a little bit more seriously this time, maybe I'll have a chance. So I entered this. I practiced very hard that summer with my mom, who was my accompanist. So I exercised all morning. I was a pretty big athlete in those days. Came home, practiced a little bit. Then my mom and I played until we were both exhausted till the end of the day. To prepare for this competition, I went to the competition with no idea, no thought of winning, or I just wanted to have fun and make my music mine. And I get there, and lo and behold, I win first prize. And as my bio says, the other first prize winner, they gave out another first prize that year to the great singer Jesse Norman. And wow. Jesse and I ended up performing together, mostly for a month or two after the competition in Germany, touring the America houses, where the ambassadors had their offices. So we would go there and she would sing. They brought in a little piano for me. I would play the piano. And actually we got to be quite close. And I must say, in those days when I would be close to her while she was performing, I got my model of what I wanted the clarinet to be capable of. Because this Jessie, she was an enormous woman, but she could sing with the utmost delicacy, as well as the most extreme, beautiful, powerful voice that would fly and float over the biggest orchestra. And so that's what I heard. In fact, I went to Jessie one day. I said, Jessie, when I hear you sing, it feels like I bought my instrument at a toy store. How do you get that? How do you get that sound? Man, we would talk about that, and I would dream about it. And one day, many years later, I was capable of that. I mean, I always wanted to be a soloist, but I figured out how to get this presence out of a little clarinet mouthpiece on a little tube that came as close as I could dream of being to the vocal cords of a world-class singer. So most of my expression was built on that model, not just studying clarinet and just trying to listen to clarinet recordings and copy that. I never had the clarinet and recordings of clarinet as a model.
That's fantastic.
Always the voice.
If I was going to bring this up later, but this answers a big question for me. If you're going to emulate a human voice, which is the ultimate, I think Jesse Norman is the way to go, because that is such a beautiful instrument and beautiful person inside and out. To be that kind of artist. And when I have had the pleasure of working with you, Frank, when I'm standing there, you're spinning out these beautiful lines, and this is a compliment. You play like a singer, and this is probably where it came from. You agree?
I think so. I got a little bit off the beaten track, because I would then analyze singing, and I'd sing notes like, oh, And to do that, I would move my mouth and my tongue around a lot. Now, as a trumpet player, you know that to play one of our instruments, you need flexibility of sound, but you need somewhat of stability of the sort of the whole physics that go on between your mouth and the instrument.
Right.
I was exaggerating that by opening and closing. So finally, I decided, I found out how to keep the mouth stable, but to try to get the sounds of someone singing with a wide open mouth. You know, because you can't sing like dee, da, da, dee, da.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
And unfortunately we hear that throughout the world sometimes.
My model was this openness and this color changeability of every note, like with the voice or with the violin, you know, with the pressure of the bow and then the left hand vibrato.
Right.
I wanted all those expressive elements to be in my air.
Did Jessie Norman's
which is an unusual.
Did her vibrato influence
Well,
your playing?
Not really, because vibrato is part of your expression at the moment. You know, you don't superimpose a vibrato on a sound. You know, you sing a sound, and then if you need more, you get it from deep down, and that's where it comes from.
When you're teaching,
like trumpet players, they'll play trumpet players into this kind of vibrato.
right.
But I'm sure there are players who can get that too.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Both Bernard Edelstein always thought the singing quality was very important through the horn. He always just felt that the trumpet or the instrument, to say, was just an extension of who you are or what you want to say from inside. It's not the trumpet that's alive. It's us making the sound, and that's just our vehicle to communicate.
Exactly.
You know, with your students, Frank, we use students now. You have a strong studio at the Cleveland Institute of Music, where I also schooled. Is that something you're instilling in your students, that vocal quality of playing?
Of course. I mean, a lot of the approach to the clarinet, I won't say it's not vocal, but it's not as vocal as I would like. But when you're trying to achieve the high level of vocality, I mean, you get into a physics that's a little different from the convention. But those of my students who've done it well have done it very well. And I've had students go on. One of them now is principal in LA. He's getting to be very, very well known. He was first principal in the Metropolitan Opera before he went there. I have the Orchestre de Paris, the principal there, and the Seattle Symphony, San Francisco Symphony. I have students scattered around making music in a very high level way, and I think they all are looking for at least elements in what was important to me and making them their own. I mean, we're all capable. We all have to be led by ourselves, after all. So you can't get a student, to be a copy, and you wouldn't want to do that anyway.
Right. We have to find out who that person is and make them the best they can be.
Yeah, that's their search.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about schools of thought, like with the violin playing or string playing. There's different schools. There's the Russian school, the French school, the Italian school. Is there different schools in the clarinet world?
Well, there used to be, I would say, much more than there are now. For example, when I was in Munich competing, the players from Eastern Europe, like Russia and Czechoslovakia, had a very soloistic, distinct, very bright. I mean, it was a sound that went through you, And then the French had a much lighter, but also bright, and it sort of had a little shake in it. And then there was the New York sound, and people used to talk about the New York sound. It was a bright, forward. I never liked it, actually, but I wanted to find, when I heard these other players, and I would be touring later on in the next few years, I heard many soloists, wind soloists in the German orchestras, especially oboe. that I really wanted to get something about the roundness of the sound that they got, and this kind of resonance that when the oboe would play an A, it shook every molecule of air in the entire hall, no matter how big the hall was. So, you learn, and I don't even remember your question, Raffaele, but I never sort of subscribed to a sound, a school of sound making production. I was from New York, so people said, actually, last week, a guy from Hong Kong and I were talking, he was interviewing me. He said, Frank, I thought you had the quintessential New York sound. And I said, that's funny for you to say that. And I'm flattered, but I never knew what the New York sound was, and I was never trying to achieve it. I want to make sounds that I can relate to from my heart, and that's not from instrument.
That's true.
These days, people are concerned with what instrument or equipment you're playing, and for me, it's more about what you're putting into it, because you can play on anything.
Correct.
As you know.
I agree with that. 100%. Frank, there was a day when you could put on an LP vinyl, and we used to do this with all different repertoires we were learning to prepare for auditions or just the performances. We get together, our buddies together, and in two measures, you can tell, oh, that's the Chicago Symphony Brass sound. Oh, that's Philadelphia strings. That's Concertgebouw. That's Berlin. That's Vienna. And that was a real beautiful moment, because they had their real style. Cleveland had their own style, and in sound. How has that changed in today's world?
It's changed big time. Yeah, I agree with you. Orchestras are almost unrecognizable these days, because they all sound very good, and they all sound mostly generic. I won't say all, but mostly generic. A lot has to do actually with musical direction, because the players today are much more capable technically than they ever were, and with each subsequent year, you can say that even more so.
Right.
But for example, in the old days, where there were music directors like Toscanini, Bruno Walter, Furtwängler, Kleiber, Karajan, all these names are like classical names. Ask people today who would be akin to this. Where the parallels. Actually, this is interesting, Raffaele. The other day, I was interested in our conversation last week or the other couple of days ago, and I wanted to know what up and coming young conductors. Then I saw a couple of names, of which I knew some of them. And I thought, I don't want to buy into that. So I found this woman. I wonder if you've ever heard of her. Her name is Margo Gračinste, or something like that. She's a Lithuanian woman. But it almost blew me away to another world. She's like in her 20s. She happens to be gorgeous, which is irrelevant, but what you notice about the approach of someone like that, or you, or another fine conductor, or the Furtwänglers and the Toscaninis and Reiners, is that the talent level is so over the top. Talent to just having music coming out of every pore of your body. And if you watch this, it's like, it almost blew me away. Promise me you'll watch it.
I will take a look. That's another good point, because having played with the Cleveland Orchestra for so many years, Frank, you often had guest conductors. Now, the Cleveland Orchestra is always the Cleveland Orchestra, but can you talk a little bit about the fact, and this is part of conducting, which I don't think I can explain. I don't think anyone can explain. Technique's one thing, your eyes, your personality, but what is it that changes the chemical balance of a symphony orchestra and changes the sound for the week? Can you describe a little bit of going from Sir Colin Davis to Mazel to all these other great what is it when the moment they walk on the podium, the sound changes somehow?
Well, yeah, they were great. Well, you know what? Like, it's like when you come into a room who's a person, like if you were in a room and the Buddha comes in, he may not say anything because the Buddha is mostly silent. But there's an energy, and there's something, there's this all-knowing, or even like a great religious leader, Moses or Christ, or any, like Winston Churchill, someone who has that kind of dynamism. You know, it could be understated or overstated, but that way someone walks in the room, you know that the atmosphere has changed. And when a conductor or a soloist comes on stage and they touch either the strings or the piano, it's like, I think the atmosphere in that room has been altered. You can tell. Absolutely. It's like a magic. It's magic.
Because a great artist standing in front of an orchestra can actually inspire you to play better. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's funny, people would ask me that. I never felt like I needed inspiration. I mean, I always give what I can, everything, and then more. But the group, if the group is inspired, it's definitely different from 5 or 6 people in the group giving a lot and the rest, you know, giving something, but not being inspired. You know, there are players that are always inspired, whether they play well or not. And there are other players, especially in orchestras, because we have a lot of people sitting there, you know, great numbers. You're not talking about Itzhak Perlman and Isaac Stern, you know, in the sections. You're talking about people who get there because they're polished and they've studied well, and they play in time, they play in tune, and they get a decent sound. But artistry in an orchestra is not encouraged most of the time. That sounds like a weird thing to say.
I agree with that 100%. I'll tell you, as a conductor, I fight this, and it bothers me even as a conductor. The fact is, especially for you, you came from an international solo career, and now you became principal clarinet in a world-class orchestra. And that's a big difference. I feel if through audition process, if we are to hire the right person, the right musician, and put them in the right place in the orchestra, whether it's first, second, or whatever, in the position, it's important to, as a conductor, to allow them to play the way they play, not to hire someone and then tell them how to play their instrument. And I find I find it stifling. I think it's stifling. And what it does, it's in a way, maybe this is too strong a word, but it could dummy down a player in an orchestra. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts, as you know. I could talk forever about that. But I'll tell you, so the year after I won my prize in Munich, I was still in Juilliard. And I'd never been invited to the Juilliard Orchestra. And I thought, this is weird, you know, because I think I played pretty well. There were 2 or 3 orchestras, and they didn't ask me. So I noticed there was an audition for the American Symphony. The American Symphony was an orchestra started by Leopold Stokowski, and it met in Carnegie Hall, and we played our concerts there. So I got in touch with the administrators, and I said, I'd very much like to audition for Maestro Stokowski. Here I was, really young. Oh no, this was before I went to Munich. I was maybe 19 years old. And I went to Maestro Stokowski's apartment, which was this magnificent apartment penthouse on Fifth Avenue, you know, overlooking the park. And I was led to a room by a helper, and then the maestro comes in. Well, you know, he looks like a maestro. Stokowski is just him, it's a thing of beauty. Mm-hmm. And sat down, he greeted nicely, he says, well. So I played him, and after about a half hour, Miss Cohen, I'd love for you to play principal clarinet for me in the American Symphony. Would you like to do that? I said, I'd love to. Because number one, I'd be making money. and number two, I wanted to play with and play in Carnegie Hall, which I had never done. Right. So I show up my first week on the job, And Stokowski, was there with his beautiful hair and his long hands, looking like the god that he was. And he starts conducting. And at the intermission, he summoned the assistant conductor to bring me back to his room. And so I went back to see him backstage at Carnegie. And he says, Frank, great job. He says, but he says, I feel like you're watching me. You're watching me all the time. And he says, you know what? You don't need to watch me. He says, because I think you're trying to please me. And Frank, I'll tell you why I loved you in my apartment, is you were playing with your heart. You weren't pleasing anyone but you. He says, when I conduct, I mean, it's for the group, but don't even look at me. Don't take any information from me. Play the way you feel. It'll be great. He says, if you play the way you did in my apartment, you'll succeed. He says, because I'll tell you, somebody with your personality, if you enter the orchestral business, they'll hate it. If you start watching people and they start leading you around by the nose, he says, you need to find a job where you can actually be you. Otherwise, you'll never be happy in orchestra. And I think he was right.
I agree with it. I think it's beautiful. And what a great lesson. What a great lesson. If your first rehearsal, wow, that's amazing.
Years later, I found a person who did a paper on Stokowski that found notebooks that they had got from his estate. And it was about this period. And they found Frank Cohen. This is a real musician, he said. I mean, I was a kid. I wasn't a real musician. I just, I was clarinet in some way, and he liked it. But it meant a lot, 50 years, 60 years later, hearing that, 50 years later, and knowing that he thought a musician who wanted me to play that way and not look to him. Your question, yes, a conductor can play an orchestra. And there are certain, throughout the orchestral profession, there are superstars that are, they benefit from inspiration, but they don't need inspiration. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly.
You probably know some of the, Lynn Harry, principal cello in Cleveland.
Lynn, was he a principal cellist in Cleveland when you were there?
I mean, he inspires inspiration. Of course, he learned from them. But I never look to a conductor for inspiration. I look to see if they're doing their, a great job at bringing this group to a new place, a place that actually that carries their voice with it.
That's terrific. That's beautiful.
That's why the great, you can always recognize the old orchestras by solo players, but often you can also recognize them from the artistic leadership from the front.
Exactly right. Like, and those were the days. And
yeah.
You can tell by the color, the balance, the nuance, and the tempi of what he chose, that type of thing. It's funny because everyone always thinks Toscanini's tempos were really faster than most, but when I clock them, they're about the same. It's just that it's very clean and very precise playing because his level of what he wanted, he raised the bar very much in American orchestras back then and set the standard.
The other thing about conductors in those days, if you think of, Reiner, Zell, Furtwängler, Kleiber, they all played well. Some of them composed well.
Correct. That's correct.
And could conduct, could play, could compose, just like in the day of Mozart and Beethoven.
Right.
And Wagner and Schumann, Mahler.
Right. That's
today, people pick up a stick. They never have gotten a note on an instrument.
Right. Or they weren't lucky enough to sit in the back row of the Cleveland Orchestra and learn. I learned how to conduct by sitting in the back row, watching conductors and listening to people like you around me. I mean, what a beautiful thing. I mean, learning to play the trumpet you can do in a room, but learning to play in an orchestra and learning to play that repertoire in Severance Hall, for example, is a whole nother animal that you have to experience to do it. So the journey for me, and I think what you're saying is going from the back row to the front was the gate for me, the journey, because now I understand the player. I understand what they want. I also know what they don't want. And that's equally as important.
Right.
Because
You said,
nobody wants, you always want to hire a conductor who doesn't speak your language, so he doesn't have to talk. You know, but communicate with the gesture, the feeling, the eyes, the hands, and the body, you know, that whole thing. It's like
yeah,
musical miming in a way.
yeah. You know, you said something interesting. You said I walked from the back to the front, but then the other part of that is you turned around.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So you're not actually speaking directly to the audience.
Right.
But if you speak in a profound way to the people in front of you that you're facing in the back,
That's
the
right.
audience, they get it.
And I always love the idea, or it's a humbling idea, the fact that I'm the only person on that stage who doesn't make a sound. It's the players, and it's about the orchestra. Listen, Frank, you're wonderful. Congratulations on a great, great career. I'm happy to know you. You are a stellar gentleman and world-class player. You're the best, Frank Cohen.
Thank you so much, Raffaele. And I wish you and your family lots of health going forward and much success.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Same to you. Ciao.
Okay. Bye-bye.